Hi, everyone. My name is Andy Rathman Noonan, and I am the Executive Director of the National Science and Technology Medals Foundation. We're so excited to have you all here for STEM Spotlight with Priyanka Komala. I'd like to first thank Ms. Komala for being here to share her experiences and advice with you tonight, and Sarah Williams, who will be leading the discussion. I'd also like to thank the National Science Foundation for their generous support that allows us to share conversations like this with all of you. And finally, thank you to the University of Michigan Girls in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science for participating in the conversation. It is our mission to build diverse and inclusive STEM communities that are equitable and truly representative of our society. So where do we start? Well, it's in classrooms and webinars just like this one, highlighting voices that are often left out of the conversation and creating spaces where students like yourselves can both learn from and relate to experts who share our goals for the future of STEM. What we hope to show through this conversation in all of our programming is that there isn't one way to build a STEM career, and there certainly isn't just one perfect path to success. But there are, at every turn, incredible role models and mentors that you can look to for advice and inspiration. We hope that tonight's conversation with Ms. Komala serves as one such reflection point for you along this way. We invite you to join in the conversation, and in doing so, help us create an inclusive and safe space for all. When using the chat or asking questions, please take a moment to reflect on how your language may be perceived by others here. Thank you for your contributions and for helping us create a respectful environment where everyone feels welcome to listen, share, and enjoy. One final note before we get started: if you have technical issues, please text LC Charity and they'll help you troubleshoot. They will drop their phone number in the chat right now, and their contact information is also listed in the event email sent earlier today. Now, I'll turn it over to our featured expert, Ms. Komala and Ms. Williams, to kick off the discussion.
Welcome to the National Science and Technology Medals Foundation's STEM Spotlight Series, where we're meeting the top minds in STEM to learn more about their paths to success. I'm Sarah Williams, a science journalist. Talking with me today is Priyanka Komala, a technology leader at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Priyanka leads digital transformation initiatives at the National Academies and is passionate about using technology to help scientists communicate. She also hosts a podcast called CurryUp Startup, in which she spotlights Asian business and tech leaders. Priyanka has a master's in computer science from American University and an MBA from the University of Michigan. To the students joining us live tonight, the Q&A opens as soon as we start. So if you have any questions, go ahead and submit those through the Zoom Q&A feature, and we'll answer those in the second half of our event. Thank you so much for joining me today, Priyanka.
Such a pleasure, Sarah, and thank you all for inviting me to speak to my alma mater, Go Blue.
So it seems like your job really spans science, technology, communication, and business. Tell me about your education and career path that led you here.
Absolutely, Sarah. I grew up in India, the southern part, Chennai, and it's been an incredible experience. Now that when I look back, the last decade of transformation as a young girl heading to the United States to pursue my education. And here I am today sharing my insights about my career path in STEM. So it's been an incredible journey. And I really want to thank everybody who's been part of this journey along with me. So to give you some background about how I started my journey as a STEM professional, as a lot of attendees could be from Asia, STEM is one of the default options that you're allowed to choose. So I was no different. So I pursued my undergrad in electronics and communication engineering from Chennai, Anna University, and was the top 5 in the state of Tamil Nadu. So I was academically too good, and my parents decided, you need to go to the other side of the world to pursue your education. So that's how I started my journey, getting onto an airplane, having never even seen one all my life, in close quarters. So getting onto the airplane was my first time actually going to the airport. And, that's how I came to the US, not knowing what to expect. And then I started my master's in computer science at American University. And then as a technologist, I felt I could continue to create more of an impact, not just as somebody who understands the back end behind putting together a product or a service, but how do we continue to enhance the lives of others? So I felt I needed a strategic seat at the table, which led me to get my MBA from the University of Michigan, Ross School of Business. And my experience at the US National Academies of Sciences, to give you a bit of a background, we were chartered in the 1860s as special advisors to the nation. So I really enjoy working in a place that has a passion to create a difference in the society across the world.
Okay. So what does it mean to be a technology leader for the National Academies? What does your job entail on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis?
So I work on several transformation projects, which are more focused on a digital outlet. So say, for example, we work on projects where we can really put the scientific information that we work on in an accessible format, in a more engaging format. So it's not just of value to the scientific community, but goes beyond them. We want to make sure we reach out to the general public who can understand the science behind the science in an easier to understand format. So be it in the form of graphics or interactives or ways in which they can create an impact in their daily life. Say, for example, like climate change. How does that really impact? How do small decisions in your life really impact the society, the nature? So things on those perspectives. And we always look at ways in which we can engage with the public and different shareholders that will be interested in the work that we do.
Okay. Is there a particular project that you're either working on right now or have worked on recently that is particularly exciting that you could tell us about?
Sure. Go and check out NASEM.org, which is
Okay.
an Academies website. I've been part of this digital transformation initiative where we have revamped the entire institutional website. So we have 6 to 7 divisions within the academies and the main academies itself. How do we portray us in such a way that people really understand who we are and what we do and what kind of information we can provide so they can make better decisions, be it from a policy and a strategic standpoint, as well as on a day-to-day basis. So that's been an incredible project that I've had the opportunity to collaborate on.
Okay. So, and you also host a podcast. How did that come about and what do you hope to convey to your podcast listeners?
Yeah, so the podcast is called CurryUp Startup. As the name implies, it's to spotlight Asian business and tech leaders. And for me, Sarah, I feel there's a need for us to amplify Asian voices. And that's something that feels more authentic to me being an Asian. And I enjoy spotlighting people from different walks of lives from the Asian community, be it from CIOs, chief information officers, technology leaders, to personal well-being coaches, economists, children book authors, people from a wide variety of spectrum of lives, so they can provide inspiration from their own personal journeys, which will inspire my audiences who are global leaders, millennials, people of color within and outside of the Asian community who can benefit from them. And we're close to acing our 50th episode, in the next couple of weeks.
That's great. So a lot of what you do, both at the National Academies and through your podcast involves making connections with people and having really strong and innovative communication and leadership skills. How did you learn or pick up those skills?
Going to the University of Michigan Business School, I should say. I think it's I have a lot of technologists or an engineer, because when I look at my career path, let me take a step back. I started as an engineer, turned myself into a technologist, and then into a business and a technology leader. And the common fabric, Sarah, that runs across all these different career pivots that I've made is your ability to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
You could be great. You could be an expert in your field of technology or engineering, but how do you really communicate what you're doing and why it matters to people around you? I think that's very essential. And that's where your business and your communication skills come into existence. It's more about how do you share the impact that you create? And storytelling is something that's very close to my heart. And I think I have a bit of a natural trait itself. I stood on stage at age 5 and I gave my first speech about how an airplane works. So that's how I got into this field of storytelling, I should say.
So you've been doing it all your life.
I know. It's kind of, funny thing. You can't separate the microphone from me. That's how my friends and family see me.
So you've said, in your last answer, how important the MBA was for some of those skills. Do you think more scientists and engineers and people working in the technology space should pursue MBAs or, in general, make a more concerted effort to acquire business and leadership skills? For our students listening, is that something maybe they should consider?
Everybody has a path to choose. And getting a degree, like an official certification, was a path that I chose by going to the University of Michigan. And I have great regard for the alumni, the network, the brand that I'm able to associate myself with. And I'm still in touch with my University of Michigan, admissions team, serving as an ambassador to them when we have a new candidate who's interested in pursuing an MBA. So I really appreciate how people still look at getting a certified degree from one of the best schools in the world as a nice segue to pivot your career. But times have also changed, and that's not necessarily the only path in which you can achieve your career success. If you're able to pick up basic business skills, basic communication skills, one-on-one finance skills, that's a good start for you in terms of your journey towards whatever impact you want to create going forward. So it depends on what you want to do with your life and how you want to really create an impact. That's how I would start in terms of finding out how do you really figure out your career path going forward.
Okay. How critical has mentoring been to your career path, as you've made all these pivots? And do you have any advice for students on finding a good mentor and building a really quality mentor-mentee relationship?
Absolutely, Sarah. Mentors play a critical role in our career success because they give us different perspectives. And I've personally had my own share of mentors at different stages of my life, and they don't necessarily have to belong to the field of technology or to the field of business. They could be people who can assess and see your life from an outsider's perspective and can give you suggestions on how do you really structure your life and your career going forward. So it's never too late to cultivate your own board of mentors. But the other thing is you also need to act on the suggestions that your mentors give. So it's not necessarily, the enough to just hang out with a group of mentors or just create these relationships. But how do you nurture those relationships? How do you invest your time and energy so people get to know you at that personal level to understand how you think and then give you suggestions on how this could be a win-win from a mentor-mentee perspective? And I've been on both sides of the table, I should say. As I started my career, I was a mentee where I would always look at constant ways of enhancing my skill sets, enhancing my mindset on what the future what the future could offer. But of late, I've also been on the other side of the table as a mentor, sharing my career experiences, the different pivots that you'll have to make, especially from a cultural standpoint, because as somebody who grew up in a different country and is creating a niche and a career on the other side of the world, it's very important to understand how do you adjust yourself and cross through rough seas sometimes to get to the port. If you look at it as an analogy, as a ship traversing across different countries.
Okay. How much of what you do at the National Academies is international? It sounds like you have a really good grasp of some of the importance of international collaboration. Are you able to do that at the National Academies?
Yes, there are several divisions within the academies that work on international partnerships. And the best part about working at an institution like the Academies is we work with scientists across the globe. So you bring in people from different communities, different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. So that really makes the institution what it is today.
Okay. Do you miss, the engineering and being a technologist now that you're so focused on the communication angle of science?
Sarah, these are different skills that are always part of your toolkit. Having an engineering background helps you look at a different way when you're solving issues. It gives you the analytical perspective, the creative perspective. Being a technologist, it helps you understand what kind of products or technologies could really enable you to make this vision a reality. And then your business or your communication skills really help you put all these different pieces of the puzzle together and create a vision where you lead a group of people to actually understand the creative mindset, the technological mindset, and make your vision a reality, which impacts the society.
Okay. Being a female and an Asian American, I'm sure you have found yourself at times to be the only person who looks like you in a room or a meeting. Can you tell me a little bit about, how that's affected your career and why you think diversity and representation in STEM is so important?
I think it's a blessing sometimes to be the only person in the room who looks like you, because you bring in a lot of different thinking. And, especially with the global crisis or the different kinds of crises that you're seeing, be it the pandemic or other issues that you see with racial injustice movements. Having people from different backgrounds is what organizations want, because they need to understand the different cultural mindsets that the organization needs to quickly adapt and accommodate. So I think it's a welcoming gesture to have people, uh, Asian Americans, people from different backgrounds, to be part of that leadership team. And let me give you some, brief statistics as well that will help open the minds of our listeners too. There was a recent study from the University of Maryland and Columbia Business School. It was a joint study where they talk about how diversity helps in innovation. And this country needs a lot of innovation, right? So, and where does that come from? It comes when people think differently. People bring in different skill sets from different parts of the world. And two, if you look at the kind of value and impact that gender management can bring to the Fortune 500 companies or the S&P 500 companies, it's estimated that there'll be around $42 million increase in value of S&P 500 firms if there's more gender management as part of the thinking in the boardrooms and leadership. So I think it's an incredible time and place to a lot of people who look different to come together and create an amazing career for themselves and for the companies that they belong to.
Mm-hmm. But we have a lot of student listeners, and many of them are trying to figure out what's next in their own education or careers. What's your kind of overall advice to STEM students on how to find their own path and figure out what's going to work for them and make them happy?
That's an amazing question, Sarah. STEM is a skill set. There needs to be a mindset shift in terms of how you look at STEM. It's not just a degree which leads you to a job and that's the end of it. There was a recent study by AGU that talks about how STEM jobs are going to increase in the next decade. So it says that 33% of the US economy is based on STEM jobs, and 67% of our economy is supported by STEM jobs. So to the attendees over here, think of the impact you can create for the US economy through your STEM education and how you really create an impact on an ongoing basis going forward as well. And the good news is, given you're going to graduate in the next couple of years, there are close to 850,000 new jobs that are expected in the next decade. So that's a lot of opportunity. Mm-hmm. But one thing I would suggest is think of 3 important things which have helped me in my STEM career path. One is think of the impact. How do you shape the future of the world? And that's one of the reasons I said it's not just getting a degree and a job. It's more about how do you continually enhance your skill sets to create an impact, and to have allies as part of this process. As we talked about creating that board of mentors, have those people with whom you can collaborate. These could be your peers, these could be your professors at school, or people that you meet at your networking events at University of Michigan too. And 3, before you graduate, start thinking about creating your brand. And I would continually say this to you guys as a constant reminder, because you need to manifest yourself through a brand. You don't have to be a Richard Branson or Oprah Winfrey to do it. You could do it as Priyanka, as Sarah, and that'll help people understand what is that you're trying to stand for. What are some values that you want to associate with yourself, and help you create a great brand by the time you graduate from college. So start thinking about how do you create an impact, creating allies, and nurturing your brand going forward.
Mm-hmm. For students who think that, what you're doing sounds really fun and are really passionate about strategic communication of science and engineering topics, do you think that's an area that is ripe with opportunity right now and that you would recommend going into?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, close to 1 million jobs are waiting for you. So the world is yours to conquer.
What's on the horizon for you? You seem like someone who always has an idea of, what you want to do next. You do have this personal brand. Where do you hope both your job and your podcast take you in the future?
Thank you for those kind words, Sarah. For me, it's about how do I amplify Asian voices through my podcast. So that's my continuous endeavor to spotlight these amazing Asian leaders who are in the making as well, so I can share their personal journeys and elevate their own brand too. So it's more like a process of creating brands for my podcast guests too. Mm-hmm. And I would continue doing this. And as far as my career hat goes, I would love to find ways in which We work on these different digital transformation initiatives to continue to engage the public and the scientific community and bridge that gap.
Okay. A last question from me before we get to our student listeners. We're asking everyone in this series, what are you reading, watching, or listening to right now, STEM related or not?
Maybe I should say something that's not STEM related, given we've powered this talk with a lot of stats and data.
Sure.
As an Asian, I love to binge watch. I haven't had the chance and the time to do it in the past, but I've been binge watching a lot of Bollywood Indian movies and finding time to watch my online Zumba classes and actually doing a little bit of dance grooves too. So that's
great.
Keeping me engaged.
Good. We have some questions coming in from students here. The first one is, how do you go about making the shift from a purely technological job to a career and job that integrates business and technology? What sorts of roles allow for the intersection of these two fields?
That's a pretty loaded question. Job titles don't really matter, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about what is that you want to do with your life. And this could be at an intersection of STEM. Even STEM has now branched into humanities, arts. It's called STEAM. So there are several different ways in which you can work at these intersections, and it doesn't have to be. One of the myths that we have is if you're a STEM graduate, you need to be a scientist. That's kind of a standard assumption that you would have. But there are several different paths that you can take. You can be a technologist if you want to go to a boot camp and start coding, and that works at the intersection of science and technology. If the end product benefits the society around you, or if you completely want to go and become a podcaster like me as part of a side hustle, where you're using your knowledge about science, technology, and engineering to talk about issues that are science based, that's a radical career choice that you could make. And the world is big for a lot of these different choices. So I would say create that board of mentors who can really give you that perspective on your next steps forward, wherever those intersections are in those fields.
Okay. The next question is really similar. So if you feel like you've already answered it, that's okay. But it's this person asks, I have many different interests and ideas for my career path. How do you recommend finding or choosing the right one?
A lot of it starts from introspection. The answer is within you. And I've been through this journey myself, and I'm still on this ongoing journey. What is that you want your legacy to be? I think that's a good question to start thinking. So it's more like reverse engineering what the end of your life could be, and then figuring out what baby steps could you start from today that'll help you get there. And we call this the positive emotion methodology, where you think about, here's how I would love people to remember me. Just like you give a eulogy, right? You practice what your eulogy could look like. That's part of a psychological shift in your mindset. So there was recent research by Dan Cable, who's an organizational behavior professor at London School of Economics. And in his recent book, Exceptional, he talks about how do you really create this mindset of finding your signature strengths. What are things that you're really good at? And I would say start with 3 unique strengths. And one of the suggestions he has as part of his research is you ask people around you, pick 3 people, be it your mentors, your first managers, your professors, your parents. Ask them, what are you really good at? And then get that feedback and then use those as your signature strengths to really figure out, okay, I'm good at storytelling. I'm good at solving a problem in a very different way than what people think about. And those could be some basic fundamental blocks from which you can figure out how do you really shift your careers or pick a career that aligns with your authentic signature strengths. So that's where I would start.
Okay, that's great advice for everyone. Another question, do you have any suggestions for students encountering imposter syndrome? Did you encounter this as a student and or professional?
Thanks for bringing up this question, because on my podcast, CurryUp Startup, I brought in a couple of technology leaders where we had the same challenge that we were talking about. We have this imposter syndrome. How do we really get to overcome it? And one of the first questions, some of my expert guests on my show asked where, is that really an imposter syndrome? Because it's a buzzword that most of us relate to because we are overwhelmed, we are burnt out, we feel we are inadequate, we have the fear and uncertainty of what happens next. So delving deep into us to figure out, is this really an imposter syndrome, is the first critical question that you need to have. And it's challenging times. Everybody has the fear of what's going to happen next. And one suggestion I would have, based on what I've seen interviewing a lot of wellness and personal coaches and some of the top business leaders in the field, is focusing on your emotional well-being. It could start with mindfulness and meditation practices. And one example I would give is spend 10 to 20 minutes at least 3 to 4 times a day, 3 to 4 times in a week, uh, to meditate. It calms down a lot of your anxiety, your fear, anger, depression, resentment. Those could be small ways in which you calm your own inner storms. And then having a very mindful uh, uh, intention in terms of being confident about what the future is going to bring. And everybody's going through the same thing. It's not just you. So don't single yourself out saying like, I'm the only one who's going through this tough and challenging time. Everybody is. So start with mindfulness by taking deep breaths. That's just one simple way. If you have a couple more minutes, I know as busy undergrads, life is a little challenging, but you can spend a few minutes just meditating within yourselves, and it makes a ton of difference. And those could be some strategic ways in which you can overcome imposter syndrome. Check out my podcast. The last couple of episodes are really focused on imposter syndrome, so that could give you a deep dive into how do you really overcome some of these challenges.
I love that advice. I'm over here thinking I need to take notes.
Thank you.
Someone else says, what are some challenges you faced as an Asian woman in STEM? How did you overcome them?
I'm someone who always looks beyond challenges. I think that's the way my brain has been wired. As somebody who's Asian, like some of our attendees could be, being a girl in a family who comes to a different country at 21 years, not knowing anyone and not having lived beyond her, outside of a family. Like I've never stayed outside of my family, like 21 years of my life. And here I am just packing my 2 bags and I moved to a different country and I'll have to figure out how do I really position myself here. So if you're able to overcome that challenge, I feel like any other challenge within the STEM field should be a no-brainer. But beyond that, I think a lot of support from family and friends who really believe in you. Because I came in back in 2007, and I just like a fun trivia where the only mode of communication with my parents was through a calling card, and they were so expensive. So I only used to have money to, as a grad student, how our lives are, to call my parents like 5 minutes a day. And that's all I had to actually communicate how I was living in a different country, not knowing what I was up to, going to grad school. So that's how my life started. But I feel if you have the intention to succeed, and if you're determined that, I want to make a mark for myself, nothing could stop you from being who you are and creating a mark for yourself.
Okay. We talked a little bit about mentorship earlier, but somebody asks, how do you recommend finding mentors?
You can start small. Going to a university like University of Michigan, you can start right from your professors. Those are great mentors to begin with, who can connect you with people in the field that you work with, in be it engineering, technology, and those connections really help you forge and nurture them in the long run. So in that way, when you graduate, you have a board of mentors who are in the industry, outside of your academia. So that's one way. And two, and this is mostly underrated, is your peers could also be your mentors. There could be somebody in your class or in some of these different clubs that we have, be it your engineering club or your consulting club, women in tech club, where people have inspirational stories that you can learn from, ways in which they're navigating their own challenges when they come from a different country, when they're staying away from family, simple things that we take for granted. It could have been a challenge that somebody else is acing. So you can look at your peers. And then Michigan is a great place. Ann Arbor is a great place to network. So, networking outside of your departments. So you could go and network with the business school students or, people who are into different majors. I think those are ways in which you can cross network. So once you're out of your school and uh, you have a diverse set of people that you can actually bank on who are not necessarily engineering graduates or technology graduates. So those are simple ways. And above all, as the world has changed so much with social media taking a lot of prominence. So you have amazing platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter where you can really use it in the right way to connect with industry experts and people that you admire and follow them and connect with them to learn more. So several different ways, as long as you're determined
Yeah.
to get your hands around them.
Yeah. How did you decide to start your podcast?
For me personally, Sarah, I'm always curious. And this is when I look back, that's how I connect the dots. Because when I started the podcast, I just wanted to do something that could uh, pique my curiosity. And that's how it started. And then I realized, every time when I meet people outside of my friend circle, I'm always interested about learning about their personal journeys. I figure out, okay, how did you ace this challenge? How do you stay so calm and composed in such situations? That always was going in the back of my mind. So be it when I'm in an Uber, I keep talking with the Uber driver saying like, okay, how does this business model work? What are some of the challenges that you face? Is this an economically viable model, a business revenue model? Things like these. And then that's one aspect of it. And the second aspect is there's a huge gap in terms of spotlighting underrepresented Asian voices in the community. So I felt I'm seeing that as a personal struggle for myself. I'm quite sure it's a struggle for others in the Asian community. So why don't I start something that will help spotlight and amplify these Asian voices? So the curiosity is one aspect, two is amplifying Asian voices, and three, my love for storytelling. And I was like, I've done this all my life. And this is like a perfect platform to combine all of these three different skill sets. And I looked at, okay, what's a medium that'll help me get my voices heard? And podcast was just perfect. And I started this almost a year ago, and we're close to 50 episodes with CurryUp Startup, as I mentioned. And look at the world today. Podcast is everywhere. With Michelle Obama being on podcast, it's just elevated this medium of communication.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest lessons that you feel like you've taken away from people you've interviewed on your podcast?
It's like learning the lives of 50 people in a year. I would have never had the time or the interest to actually go and learn somebody's life at that pace. So I'm really fortunate. Podcasting has helped me connect with these wise people from different walks of life, different age groups, different backgrounds. And one aspect that I commonly see, Sarah, is emotional well-being is really crucial. In your 20s, you feel like, okay, I can burn out myself. I can work 18 hours a day and feel that, I'm working so hard. But when you hit your 30s, like what I am, or 40s, 50s, 60s, and you still want to continue to create a niche for yourself, build a brand for yourself, be one of the top leaders in whatever field you choose as a career path, you need to sustain yourself in the long run. That's very important. And what we take for granted in terms of our health, both emotional, physical, mental, uh, those seem to be the only things that matter as you age gracefully. So emotional well-being, and that starts with good sleep. And this is something that I keep saying myself, 8 hours of good sleep needs to be the norm. Eating well, nutrition, and exercising, at least get yourself moving 30 minutes a day, and mindful meditation practice on top of it if you have a few minutes. So those are really valuable things which we learn later in our stages of life. So just giving you that pointers, what I've learned from interviewing amazing people.
Right. Another student is asking, are there any books you've read that have inspired you and helped you advance your career?
In terms of career, I look more at digital mediums. So it's more like articles, the general stuff that you see on Harvard Business Reviews. I keep myself accountable in terms of learning. through those publications. But something else that I wanted to mention is understanding about life is more important than anything. And one suggestion I would have, a favorite book of mine is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh.
And it has a very incredible twist to it because there's a gap between stimulus and response. And this is one of the articles I read from one of the thought leaders that I follow on LinkedIn. And she talks about this, the gap that exists between stimulus and response. And that's where we solve our problems. So not overreacting when anything happens, be it in your personal or professional life, and taking that moment of deep breath before you respond. I think that's really crucial as a leader in your career. So that's one suggestion I would love to give.
Okay. Well, if any students have any other questions, now's the time to submit them. While we wait a minute to see if anyone has anything else, Priyanka, are there any other, messages that you really would like to convey to students about, what's been important to your career path, or, kind of general advice for them?
As University of Michigan students, you have a great brand that you can relate to. And believe me, the brand has really helped me after I've graduated. It's been a few years since I've graduated, but the alumni network that you have, if you tap it in the right way, can open up doors of opportunity. So make the best time of your lives when you're in school. But on the other side of the spectrum, I would also like to say, be happy and bloom where you are planted. And this is a mindset shift. When you're in the 20s, you always keep overthinking about what's next in your life. You think getting that dream career, that job title, getting your first car, first paycheck would give you all happiness in the world. But I would love to say, as somebody who's traversed that path, it's being happy where you are and doing things that make you continuously be happy is what is your authentic self. So things are going to come your way no matter what, but start being happy and enjoy your college days. You're never going to get them back again. So have fun and just smile and ace through your life with, grit and perseverance. That's what I would suggest.
Someone is asking, who is someone that inspires you or that you look up to?
I should say there are two types. One is my parents, because they believed in me when I was a nobody. They believed that I had the potential to do great things in my life and believed that I could live all by myself in a different country. So I think that was like a huge confidence booster for me. The second aspect from a professional career standpoint, Indra Nooyi, who was the former CEO of PepsiCo. She comes from Chennai, and she's been my role model from a professional standpoint, being an executive leader, and probably one of the few Asian Americans in the room who led Pepsi to where it is today. So she's a great role model for me.
That's great. Well, a big thank you for joining me today. That was so much great advice. I need to go back and listen to it myself, I think.
Thank you.
And a thank you to all of our students for joining us today as well. To those of you listening live, please fill out the post-event survey so we can improve this event for the future. I'm Sarah Williams, and this is the National Science and Technology Medals Foundation STEM Spotlight Series.